What's up, guys? My name is Alex Staup. I have the opportunity to serve as the Director of Student Engagement at Lee University down here in Southeast Tennessee. I get to be able to be a part of so much across campus, everything from new student orientation to campus activities and clubs and organizations, and intertwined within all of that is student leadership development. So I'm thrilled to be able to dive into this idea today of emerging leadership and co-authorship in your leadership journey for CSLC. But even more so, I'm excited to dive into some more conversations with you after this brief presentation to really talk about what co-authorship looks like when the rubber meets the road. So here's the deal. I recognize that we're all in different phases and stages in our leadership experiences and our leadership journeys through this college experience. But I want to focus on this notion that you're an emerging leader. Now, that's not to say that you're not a leader, but you're beginning to step in and exercise and flex and wrestle with different leadership questions and opportunities that are at hand. As you dive into this experience, I want you to wrestle with what co-authorship means. I want to challenge you to really stretch and consider what it means to co-author a great story. So in that idea, as we consider and talk about stories, I have sort of a reflective question for you to think about. If you want, you can toss around, if you're sitting in a room with some other people, some answers to this. But I want to know, what makes a great story? Is it just a nice plot? Is it only the characters? Is it the fact that there's sort of a beginning, a climax, and a resolution? Is it the fact that there's development within characters? What is it truly that makes a great story? I'll give you a couple seconds to think, and then I want you to really write down some examples of your favorite stories. It could be anything from Star Wars to Harry Potter to the Chronicles of Narnia. But what is it about these stories that make them truly great? What is it about these stories that we love? I'd venture to guess that a whole lot of it has to do with those factors we talked about just a second ago. Everything from the characters to development to conflict and crisis that arise, and opportunities for those characters to develop and grow and to commit to certain beliefs, certain attitudes, and certain decisions that progress the story along. That's what we're going to talk about today with a framework called self-authorship from a classic researcher in the field of student development named Marcia Baxter Magolda. Marcia Baxter Magolda talked about this idea of self-authorship all throughout her career, but what we'll be talking about today primarily comes from her book, Authoring Your Life, which was published back in 2009. But Marcia Baxter Magolda lays out that there are essentially 4 stages along the process of self-authorship. And along those stages, there are some key locations that assist in the development of those stages. First is the very basic stage of following external formulas. Now, you may be kicking back and thinking right now, what are external formulas? I'm no math major. That's okay. I wasn't a math major either. But external formulas are essentially the external voices in our lives that tell us what to believe, that tell us who we are, that tell us what to do. Those external voices and those external formulas truly set out a script for us to live. Now, we're going to talk about this, I'm sure, a little bit later as well, but I want you to consider some of the external formulas in your own life. Maybe they could be parents, maybe pastors or supervisors, maybe authority figures in your life. But external formulas could also be social media or your peers or the broad ranging culture that tells us what to believe, how to believe, and what to do in certain situations. Those external formulas aren't necessarily bad, but when we follow them blindly, perhaps they could lead us down a path that we never wanted to go down in the first place, which leads us to the crossroads. It's at the crossroads in our lives in which we have certain decisions or choices or foundational beliefs to begin setting forth in our lives. It's at the crossroads that we start to hear and listen to an internal voice. And as we listen and hear that internal voice, we plant roots, we till the soil, and we cultivate that internal voice. The third stage of self-authorship is trusting that internal voice. It's the opportunity to reflect and think through and begin to pick up the pen and write for yourself a great story. And then finally, the fourth stage of self-authorship is a personal foundation. And the key locations within that personal foundation is actually building the cornerstones of that foundation and beginning to secure our internal commitments towards integration, which we'll talk about more in just a second. But first, let's dive into the crossroads. We talked about those external formulas in our lives, and the crossroads are moments in which we experience tension between those external formulas, those visions and voices in our lives, with certain visions and expectations that we have for our own lives. Perhaps think about as you were embarking and jumping into this college experience. Maybe you wanted to major in English, but your parents wanted you to major in pre-med. Maybe you wanted to go to a certain college and your parents wanted you to go to another college. Or maybe all of your friends were going to another college and you wanted to go to a different college. It's in those tensions that we begin to experience the crossroads. And it's at those crossroads that we have the opportunity to listen to our internal voice. And when we listen to that internal voice, we recognize the importance of hearing that voice and working to identify it. And then we attempt to, I love this phrasing that Baxter Magolda used, we attempt to get that internal voice into conversation with the external voices. Now remember, I didn't say that those external voices are exclusively bad. In fact, a whole lot of them might be pretty good in your life. But it's when that conversation is lacking that we resign to those scripts and those formulas. The goal of listening to that internal voice is beginning a conversation. And as we begin that conversation over and over and over again, we start to cultivate that internal voice. We use it to sort out beliefs, establish priorities, and begin to piece together a jigsaw puzzle of who we are. And we begin to reduce our reliance on external voices. I love this metaphor and this vision of cultivation, and I'm sure you've heard it in plenty of sermons before, so I'll spare you of that. But when we begin to listen and cultivate our internal voice, we're truly beginning the hard process of tilling up soil. We're truly beginning the hard process of planting roots and watering those roots and giving enough sunlight to those plants or those stories to be able to grow. My wife and I have a community garden that we take part in our neighborhood here in Cleveland, and we have killed many tomato plants. But it's when we realize that cultivation requires continuous work. It requires us to constantly pull out weeds. It requires us to constantly check on our leaves and ask difficult questions about how our garden is doing. And I want to challenge you not to just grow complacent in listening or cultivating your internal voice, because then we begin to resign once again to those external voices, but to stay vigilant and continue asking questions to truly cultivate and get down in the dirt, both literally and figuratively, for that internal voice. Now, when we begin to listen and cultivate, it's in those moments that we actually begin to pick up that pen and self-author a great story. When we self-author, we begin trusting for ourselves what to believe, what to do, and where to go. And we start to follow our vision for success. One of my favorite leaders of all time is a guy by the name of John Wooden. He was a basketball coach back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He led UCLA to a record number of NCAA basketball championships, but even more so, he cultivated within young men on his basketball team how to write great stories. And he challenges people with this definition of success. And I want you to compare it to what you consider success. He says this: success is the peace of mind, which is a direct result of the self-satisfaction in knowing that you did your best to become the best of which you're capable of becoming. I want to read that once again. Success is the peace of mind, which is the direct result of the self-satisfaction in knowing that you did your best to become the best of which you're capable of becoming. It begins to set forth as we self-author and create new definitions of success that perhaps a vision for success is not complete with a measuring stick of a degree or a salary or a certain achievement, but a self-satisfaction, a true opportunity to author for ourselves a definition of success that goes beyond external formulas. We begin to self-author when our internal voice becomes the primary voice in our foreground, and when we begin to truly trust the internal voice. We recognize that reality is beyond our control. There are things that are going to happen in our lives. There are things that are going to happen within our realms and our capacities of leadership. But we can control our reaction to that reality. We can control the ways in which we respond, the ways in which we engage others in addressing conflict and hardships. And we can begin to truly trust an internal voice, to use it in developing those reactions. It's through that internal voice and that self-authorship that we begin to recognize our own personal agency, and we truly begin to step forth and, in this context, lead or self-author. Now, there is a fourth stage to self-authorship. I know that the whole theory is titled self-authorship, but Marcia Baxter McGolda goes a little bit beyond just self-authoring, and she talks about this notion of building a personal foundation. She explains that building a personal foundation is using our internal voice to make internal commitments and build them into a great foundation. We truly begin to form cornerstones in our lives that when we're faced with hard choices, hard decisions, or unprecedented times, we can lean on those cornerstones for our actions, our reactions, and our life decisions. And as we lean on those cornerstones, we begin to secure internal commitments. A word we throw around a whole lot in higher ed, and especially in Christian higher ed, is this word of integration. But when we begin to secure our internal commitments, we do begin to integrate this foundation into every aspect of our lives. And I'm not sure we really dive into that word integration quite enough because it stretches beyond just connecting and making a big pot of boiling stew. But true integration recognizes that there's a wholeness in our lives. It begins to integrate this personal foundation into our family lives, into our school lives, into our leadership lives, into our friend lives. And it begins to recognize that we're a whole person. I am Alex. I am Sarah. I am David. And it's in those moments, it's in those opportunities that we can integrate and become whole with the personal foundation. Now, remember at the beginning of this presentation that we talked about co-authoring. We've talked a whole lot about self-authorship, but what does it mean to truly engage in co-authorship? And I'm going to get a little preachy and teachy here for a second, but hang with me. One of my favorite authors is a guy by the name of Dan Allender. He's an amazing clinician and person who's got a huge heart for navigating life's hard questions. And years ago, he wrote a book called To Be Told. And it's in To Be Told that you can see the subtitle on the screen there. God invites us to co-author our future. And he says this about midway, a little bit further into the book. He says, as we live out our story, we're to give away our talents, our time, and our wealth, to indebt others not to ourselves, but to the God who writes great stories. I want to read that one more time and really help it set in, because I think a lot of times we try to think of ourselves in this self-authorship mentality that we're the main character of the story. Our story is important, and that's why we need to write a great story. Not so fast. As we live out our story, we are to give away our talents, our time, and our wealth, to indebt others not to ourselves, but to the God who writes great stories. Friends, God is writing a great story within you. I believe that. But even more so, I believe that God is writing a great story for your community. I believe that God is writing a great story for the people that you work with, the people that you walk with each and every day. And my prayer for you and my challenge to you is to take hold of that story, to not just allow the external voices passively around you to write a script that you follow, but to truly engage in a writing process with a God who deeply, deeply loves you, and a God who writes great, beautiful stories. We have talents and time, and though we're college students, certain amounts of wealth, whether that's knowledge or financial. And it's in that talent, time, and wealth that we recognize it's not ours to begin with. It's in those talents, time, and wealth that we should not use them to indebt others to ourselves, but to truly recognize that God is working and writing a great and a beautiful story. So what does this self-authorship or co-authorship mean for you? Well, you can see here that Marcia Baxter Magolda provides a really cool map that I actually love and go back to quite often. And what I love about this map is it's not just one of those old pirate treasure maps that shows you a dotted line that goes straight to an X on the map. But there are a lot of twists and turns along the way. You could see that someone might even just take a couple laps around that middle quad section there. And some people might just enjoy their time sitting underneath some trees. And that's so crucial and important to this journey of self-authorship. But what I also want to point out is some of the people that you see on this map are riding bikes alone and questioning where to go. And some of them are riding tandem bicycles. This is a metaphor that Baxter Magolda uses that I absolutely love, and I talk about it every chance that I can get, because it's on the tandem bicycle that we can truly live and work in good partnerships. She calls it good company. And my prayer for you is that you have good company along the way to be able to help support you as you ride that tandem bicycle. That you have good company that contributes to the forward motion by doing the hard work of pedaling and can look forward and see some bumps in the road, but truly who help you and equip you and engage you in being able to steer and drive that bicycle, who to steer and drive your own self-authorship journey. But I want to challenge you as well as you reflect personally on people who have ridden that tandem bicycle with you. Who can you ride the tandem bicycle with on the back seat? Who can you be good company for? Are there people? Are there other students that you get to walk alongside each and every day to be able to engage in the self-authorship process and sit on the back seat of that tandem bicycle and provide forward motion with the hard work of pedaling and see forward and offer suggestions, but empower that person to drive and guide that bike as they see fit? There are going to be mistakes on the way. You can see on this map that there are some bridges that are out. There are going to be times that you go around in circles. There are going to be moments that you run into literal walls of pain. And as you can see about midway through, there are going to be moments that you run into shadowlands. Shadowlands are challenging. They're deep, dark pits. They're opportunities and moments in which we might have to wrestle and doubt and question. But it's in those shadowlands that we might have the opportunity to listen to cultivate, and to trust our internal voice along the way. My prayer for you is that you can do and engage in this self-authorship journey together. And the question is, how do you know when you've arrived? How do you know when you're that guy at the top of the map that's sailing off into the sunset of self-transformation? Well, I've got to be honest with you guys. I don't know. And if I had to guess, I don't think there are actually probably many people who ride into that sunset. But the beauty is in the journey of self-authorship. The beauty is in the journey of picking up the pen and not just writing for yourself a great story, but writing alongside others and with a beautiful, loving God of great, great story. So here's what I want to do. I want to go ahead and leave you just a couple minutes to be able to draw a map of your own journey of self-authorship. Keep in mind the external voices, the pain and fear that might be a part of our lives as well. Keep in mind the shadowlands along the way, the broken bridges, the stream that we might have to paddle up. But I also want you to keep in mind the tandem bicycles, the good partnerships, and the opportunity for co-authorship in the context of a community and a God who loves you. I'm going to shut off my video and give it about 2 or 3 minutes to do some quick brainstorming. And then we'll circle back, I'll close out, and we'll get to talk for a little bit about what this actually means. I'd love to answer some of the questions that you guys have, but even more so, I'd love to dive in to what this practically looks like for you. So let's give it a couple minutes, and I'll be back in a little bit to close this out. All right, I know that that may not have been super long, but I hope it did offer an opportunity to critically reflect. But I'm eager and excited to talk with you guys. So I want to close with this. Let's wrestle with practical, specific ways to write a great story. Yes, that's important without a doubt. And it's important to reflect and think through that journey for ourselves. But even more in the context of your leadership role or position, whatever that looks like, how can we walk alongside others and partner with them so that they can pick up the proverbial pen and co-write for themselves a great Christ enlivened story? The last thing that I want to do for you guys is pray over you Psalm 23. This is a psalm that is really close to my heart, something that I've been forced to reflect a whole lot on in my own life. And I'm grateful for people like Dallas Willard who offer great reflections on this in Life Without Lack. But I want to pray this over you because it does talk about a bit of the co authorship journey, the moments in which we go through the Shadowlands, the moments in which we happen upon a broken bridge, or the moments in which we ought to rest under a nice oak tree for a little while. And so I want to read this psalm over you sort of as a closing prayer. And then we'll go ahead and close out, and I'll see you in just a couple minutes to be able to talk about this. But here's Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let's write great stories, but let's not just write those great stories for ourselves. Let's truly co-author those great stories so that we can embody redemption and a Christ enlivened life in our communities. See you guys soon.